No notes, literally no notes. Incredible, impeccable, amazing.
Hey Tandem fandom, Char here. Welcome to the Tandem Collective, where you can stay up to date with the latest in book recommendations, bookish news, and updates from the team. Today, we are running back through our October TBRs to see what Jenny, Lex, and I actually ended up reading. So let's get into it. And if you are interested in what we were planning on reading, head back to our October TBR video at the beginning of the month. So I read 9 books in October. I read 4 audiobooks. 4 physical and then 1 on my Kindle, which was for work. So the first book that I finished in October actually wasn't on my TBR because I was already most of the way through it, and it was Booked on a Feeling by JC Lee. This is a super cute sort of like small town friends to lovers romance. It is the only word I can describe it with is cute. It's just cute. She's like a high flying lawyer, but she's getting burnt out. And then she goes back to like her hometown and is like spending the summer with her best friend, and then just sort of realizes that actually she doesn't want to be a corporate girly anymore. She just wants to have a nice life and sell books. And do you know what? I can actually relate to that. I can relate to that so hard. So that was the first book that I read in October. Very, very cutesy.
had I did have a plan going in to the month.
Oh no.
Well, I think I showed in our TBR video at least 5 books, and I know I had some extras, and I definitely showed off some physical books. How many physical books did I read in October? This is a problem I'm having, and I think I need help with it. So if either you two or anyone in the comments can help me. Since I've bought my Kindle, I've just stopped reading physical books and I don't know how to get back into it. It's not what I wanted. It's definitely not what I planned. And it definitely is out of hand. Like I've just got to say it's not okay. And I don't know how to get back to physical reading. So I read 10 books in October. 3 of them were digital and 7 of them are audio. So the first book I was mid listening to when we recorded last, and it was House of Correction by Nikki French. And it was about the suspected criminal who was representing herself in court. And it was brilliant. I can't tell you too much about it because it is one of those books that you have to roll with the punches and find out what happens as it goes. But her journey of being in prison and trying to represent herself and trying to do all of the investigating that she needs to do from prison was super interesting. And I would definitely recommend listening to it on audio because whoever narrates it is excellent. So tick from me. Nikki French.
I read 10 books and I had 2 additional books that I didn't finish, which I'll touch on because I put them down for reasons. I had like no plans, but I had lofty goals going into October. I was like, I want to read horror and spooky books. I did not read horror or spooky books. I accidentally read so much fantasy. I then put myself in a fantasy slump. So, go me, well done. I read 1 horror. The first book of the month was a horror, which was Heads Will Roll by Josh Winning, which, as someone who is, again, as I feel like I've shown over the last few videos, I am a wuss. I am not a horror girly. This, exactly what I wanted. It's a slasher, so it didn't have that kind of like psychological terror that stays in my brain for years. And it was like super fast paced. We're set in a summer camp for adults, so there's this sort of kind of creepy atmosphere then already. They're telling ghost stories around the fire. I'm just like sucked in by the atmosphere. With the kind of the slasher element to it, you've got that kind of almost mystery element, almost like a thriller. Like I could see this very easily written as a thriller. But yeah, I had a great time with this one. I only had to put it down twice because I got scared, which is good going. But yeah, I think this actually would be a really good one for newbies to a horror genre. But yeah, after this, I don't think I have any other horror on my TBR. I stopped reading horror then.
The next physical book that I read was Rules for Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. I did really enjoy this, but I was texting Lex throughout, and it's a shame actually because Lex read it a while ago and like couldn't remember the bits that I was sort of picking out. But I liked it. The ending fell a little flat for me, but I think still worth a read. I think if you are a fan of Peter Swanson's, you will still like this. And again, if you like the sort of books in books, there's a theme here with my TBR this month. You will still enjoy it. It's set in a bookshop, and basically this guy, the bookshop owner, wrote a blog post ages and ages and ages ago, years ago, that detailed his 8 perfect murders. And in the present day, the FBI has come to him for advice because someone is recreating the murders that he featured on his blog. And they're all sort of famous murders from his favorite like crime thriller books. So yes, very, very good, very interesting. But I think the thing that made it fell flat for me was that I think that the reveal came a little early for me. And then we still sort of had to sit through we still had to then go through the motions of that being found out by the FBI, whereas you as the reader already knew. And I would have liked it to be a little later, but still a solid read for this month. And again, I feel the same as Jenny in that I had very lofty hopes for even some spooky romance. And I did not read. Oh, actually, no, that's a lie. I did read 2 spooky books on audio, but I didn't, nothing else.
I did read some darker books. Like I'm happy with the amount of darkness that I consumed. But yeah, it's all thriller darkness. It's not necessarily like, ooh, spooky darkness. My next book, I read on my trusty Kindle, and I bought it purely because I am an absolute fiend for Kindle daily deals and Kindle monthly 99p deals. So this book is called Hide and Seek by Andrea Mara, and I read it because I had previously loved Someone in the Attic, which was her big book of last year, I think. Um, I liked this book. It took me longer to read it than I had hoped, and I think that's purely because there are so many characters in this book, and there are 2 timelines and 3 separate narrative strands within those timelines. So you're having to keep track of everyone across all of those different spaces. But essentially, the crux of the plot is that we follow our main character, her husband, and her family moving to a small town in Ireland. And when they get there and they talk to their neighbors, it is revealed that a little girl who went missing 20, 25 years ago went missing from their house. And all of their kind of small town drama unravels. Who still lives in the town? Who's moved back to the town? Who was there originally? And then we realize that actually maybe our main character isn't quite telling all of the truths of her own either. So it was a good book, but it did take me longer to read than I would have hoped because I had to keep track of everyone. So a little slumpy, but would continue to read Andrea Mara's books.
Pretty much all of mine were physical. I think I have one book that I read on audio, but I read it both physical and audio, which is actually the one that I'm going to talk about now, if I can get it out of my stack, which is The Atlas Paradox by Olivia Blake. So this is book 2 in the Atlas 6 series, which is like a dark academia, slightly fantastical series. So we're following 6 magic users who are invited to join the Alexandrian Society, which is this kind of secret society around the Library of Alexandria. They can learn basically everything that the world has ever known. They're very, very powerful, scholarly magic users, and just so happen to like the magic in this is very, very low down. Like you could take all of the magic out of this series and it would be the exact same story. However, when the 6 are invited to join the Alexandrian Society, they are told that by the end of the year, there are only going to be 5 spaces. And they are not told how one person is going to be eliminated, but it is sort of presumed that someone has to go. The problem I had with this one is a typical me issue, which is I read book 1 in 2020. So it's been 4 years, which then meant that like because this is like similar sort of vein to like Babel by R.F. Kuang. It's a very intelligent very almost pretentious style writing, and I mean that in a good way. So for me, trying to jump back into the story 4 years later, even like with a bit of a recap, I was like, I'm a bit lost. Who are these people? Where am I? And again, with the way that it's told, it is told so that all of the characters are unlikable to a certain extent, which is fine. I have no issue with unlikable characters. But if I'm not supposed to like your character, I have to connect to them on like a different level. And I think for me, it was just the fact that I had left it 4 years between books that I then wasn't connecting to those characters on a different level. So it did fall a little bit flat for me, but I am well aware that is a me problem, not a book problem. I am going to finish the trilogy because I own book three, so I may as well, but I'm going to try not to wait another 4 years. I'm going to try and read it probably next year, because that's the other thing in my head. I can only read these books in September and October. Don't know why. That doesn't make sense. I could read them at any time of the year, but my head doesn't let me. So
I think that happens a lot, like particularly with Nordic noir for me. I
yeah,
typically only read it in winter, November onwards, maybe through till about February, and then no more. No, I need
yeah.
to read other things. So I completely get the vibe of mood reading by season.
I then, The Spider was on my TBR. I have not finished this yet. I am 130 pages in. I'm struggling with it, but now I'm in a position where I sort of don't want to push back the next bunch of TBRs to finish this. And so then does it become a book that I never finish, or do I just actually persevere and get it done? I'm considering seeing if it's on Everand, which is the audio app that I use to maybe like speed through some of it on audio. But I think obviously you will know that if you watch the October TBR review, the bit that sort of got me was the fact that there was this sack of decomposing body which was found in a tree. And if I'm being honest, I just don't think there was enough emphasis on the sack of decomposing body in the tree. It was just a bit like, oh, here's this bag of body. Let's move on. And, you know,
Might not be my own bag of body.
well, no, it's not the only bag of body. There have indeed been others. And I think what I'm finding hard is that I am finding the story so interesting. Like there's so many like little intricate bits going on, and there's stuff going on with Yuna and with Saga. And so I am enjoying it. I think also which is a problem for this month's TBR, but I find it cumbersome. It's an uncomfortable book to hold, which is why I typically don't pick up hardbacks, even though I like to buy them, because they're just so, you can't put it in a bag. I can't do anything with this. I just have to sit stationary. So yeah, I'm unsure. If anyone has any advice, please let me know. But
My next book was not on my October TBR, but I chose it on audio because I needed an audiobook and nothing else that I had scheduled was available. So I picked a Nikki French backlist title. I knew I was going to read it eventually, and it was available on audio, so I just went for it. However, I have made a mistake. What is the mistake, you might add? I had forgotten that there was a time where audiobooks did abridged versions and unabridged versions, which I really just don't think is such a thing anymore. I think nowadays audiobooks are the books as they are printed.
Mm-hmm.
But this was clearly a really old audiobook, and I wasn't paying attention when I started to listen to it. And I should have known because it was only like 3 hours long, which is not the length of a Nikki French book. So this book is called Land of the Living. And I picked it because it is described as one of Nikki French's darkest, grisliest, like grittiest books. And the opening was so great. It's about this woman who is kidnapped, and the detail that she goes into about her captor and where she's kept. All of that is super, super interesting. But then I think because I was listening to the abridged version, she literally gets one clue, walks down the street, and finds everything out. And I was like, hang on a second. This is not a book. This is a Wikipedia page. Um, so because I have a deep adoration and commitment to Nikki French, I will find the unabridged physical version, and I will read the full thing. That's how good the bits of it that I heard were. But it's a lesson that I need to learn. Watch out for the abridged versions because it made me a bit sad.
So the next book that I read was actually on my TBR, which is Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. Yay. So I love the HMRC series by Juno Dawson, and this is like a 0.5 novella. It is very little. It's like 160 pages. So this one follows the founding of HMRC. So it is just after Anne Boleyn has been and what is happening with her coven. I really loved the like romance between Anne and like our main character in here. And I just thought it was a really lovely story. I did, and again, like I said, I got myself into a bit of a fantasy slump this month. I did love this story as a standalone story by itself. You wouldn't be able to read this as a standalone by itself because you need all of the setup from HMRC to understand who the witches are, what the magic is, what HMRC is. You know, it is very much been dropped in the middle of a series. All of the world building has been done somewhere else. Yeah, I loved the story. I'm not sure how much it is essential reading for the full series, but I feel like also I won't know that until the rest of the series is out. And I think, and I don't know if this is me being a series reader. I don't know if anyone else gets this, but when a novella comes out and you're like, no, I wanted the next installment of the series. I wanted the full 500-page novel. I wanted to get my teeth into a full book. Like, I'm not a novella reader. I'm not a big fan of novellas. So I'm always going to be a little bit disappointed that it's a novella and not a full-size novel. But again, that's possibly just a me thing. It is a really, really cute, lovely book that I had a good time with.
Okay, so the next physical book that I read was Unmasked by Ellie Middleton. So I read this for Business Book Club this month, and I will be presenting next week. I knew I was going to enjoy this. It's very much a so the tagline is The Ultimate Guide to ADHD, Autism, and Neurodivergence, and that is exactly what it is. I think what I really enjoyed about this was sort of the validation of like self-diagnosis, which I think, especially as a woman, you can sort of feel a bit like, oh, you know, no one's actually officially told me, I'm not like medicated for this, so can I actually be telling people that I have ADHD? Because you never know for certain, but obviously I do know. I'm fairly certain. So I thought I really enjoyed that sort of validation of that. And yeah, I'm interested to see how the team gets on with my business book club presentation next week.
So the next book on my list is Everyone Here is Lying by Shara LaPena. And I repeatedly go back to Shara LaPena because she's a very safe pair of hands when it comes to thrillers. Very typically domestic noir, kind of a Desperate Housewives thriller vibe. And in this book, a man, a husband, a husband and a wife. A husband is cheating on his wife and he has been out at a motel with his mistress and they've just broken up. He gets home in the middle of the day, and unfortunately, he just wants 5 minutes to be on his own to process his upset and his anger at the breakup. But his little girl comes home early from school when she shouldn't have, and they get into a physical altercation. Next thing we know, mum and dad get home at the end of the day, and the little girl is missing, and she's been gone for a foreseeable period of time. Where did she go? What happened? Obviously, everybody is looking at the dad, but it would be far too easy if it was the dad. So it's a really interesting domestic noir, but again, very safe. Shadow Panna is a very safe pair of hands.
I like that. And that actually segues really nicely into my next read because also an author who, in my opinion, safe pair of hands. I know what I'm getting into. And I read Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. So Cassandra Clare is known for her Shadowhunter series. She's written like circa 5 million Shadowhunter books. I think there's like 26 or something at the moment. Swordcatcher is her first adult novel. And I went into it with the expectation of, I know it's nothing to do with Shadowhunters. I know it's an adult novel, but I also know Cassandra Clare's writing. So it's going to be super, super fast paced. I'm going to love the characters. I'm going to love the plot. I'm going to be thrown into this world. It did take me about 100 pages to get myself fully invested because I had that mindset. And this is written in a very different style. This is very slow paced. This is building that world, kind of really like starting off the world, then making it slightly bigger and then expanding it again, which I absolutely love. And now, kind of looking back with hindsight, Cassandra Clare has done that across Shadowhunters, but she's had, like I said, about 26 books to do that. She's done that all in one, again, fairly chunky book, but in one book. I had a great time reading this though. By the end, I was like, I'm obsessed. I'm already pre-ordering book 2, which is out next year. So in this one, we're following a guy who he is the sword catcher for the prince, which basically means he is his body double. If the prince is in danger, the sword catcher will be in place. He is there to be the one who is stabbed, who is attacked, who is in place for the prince, so the prince doesn't get injured. But then there's a deeper plot underneath of this kind of criminal gang who, are they trying to assassinate the prince? Are they trying to do something different? Are they trying to infiltrate this kind of royalty and this level of society? I had, like I said, I had such a fun time reading this book. It's absolutely fantastic. It is a big boy. I did listen to it on audio as well as reading physically, which really helped. Like, I was literally reading the book with the audio playing, which again just really helped me get through slightly quicker, kept me engaged in it. Because, like I said, at the start, I was struggling. And that just helps me to really focus on the book if I listen and read with my eyeballs.
So I am now just going to run through the rest of the books that I read this month. I read, and I can't find it anywhere. But I read The Lemony Snicket, The Bad Beginning. I really, really loved it. I read it in one sitting, and I have the second one on my November TBR. And then I read 4 audiobooks this month. The first and second were, of course, I was listening to and finishing off the Hayley Stephanie Scarlett Sinclair saga. So I finished off book 5, and then I skipped the Hades pod because I absolutely had to find out what happened in the final installment, and read that surprisingly quick. Well, not surprisingly, like extremely quick, because it was just twist after twist after twist after twist. So yeah, I'd be very interested to see if the Hades pod comes out of the last book. So fingers crossed for that. I then read, I don't know if any Lex maybe has read this. I read The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones, who is the author of is it The Last Good Indians? Is
Yes.
that what it's called? And I read the blurb and I thought, okay, this sounds great. And I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna read the blurb because it does sound great. Life in a slasher film is easy, you just have to know when to die. Aerial view, a suburban town in Texas, everyone's got an automatic garage door opener, all the kids jump off a perilous cliff into a shallow river as a rite of passage. The sheriff is a local celebrity, you know this town, you're from this town. Zoom in, homecoming Princess Lindsay, she's just barely escaped death at the hands of a brutal sadistic murderer in a Michael Jackson mask. Up on the cliff, she was rescued by a horse and bravely defeated the killer alone, braless. Her story is already a legend, since she's this town's heroic final girl, the Virgin Angel. Monster Vision. Halloween masks floating down that same river the kids jump into, but just as one slaughter is not enough for Billie Jean, our mass killer, one victory is not enough for Lindsay. Her high school is full of final girls, and she's not the only one who knows the rules of the game. When Lindsay chooses a host of virgins, misfits, and former final girls to replace the slaughtered members of her original homecoming court, it's not just a fight for survival, it's a fight to become the last final girl.
There's so much going on in them.
Yes, but I thought, okay, this sounds like classic teen slasher movie. Now, the thing that you know what I'm like, I don't read reviews. I don't, I thought, okay, this sounds very cool. I'm gonna start listening to it. So I put it on in the car and I'm driving and I'm like an hour in, I've got no idea what's going on. And it's because it's written as a screenplay, but it doesn't tell you that. So when I'm listening to it, I'm like,
You mean like it says interior shot in a basement?
not that in depth, but I don't fully know. I haven't seen the physical book. I sort of listened to the first. I listened to it as I was driving to my sister's, so that's an hour drive. So this is the first 2 hours of it, so it's on 2 point speed. And I got there and I was like, gun to my head, could not tell you what just happened in the first 2 hours of this book. So then I go back and look at the reviews, and yes, it's written as a screenplay. So I don't fully know the format as it's written. But yeah, not like that in depth of like interior shot this, but it's clearly written as yeah, I don't know, not as prose, not as like fiction. Um, and I think I wish I'd have known that going in, because I just didn't fully understand what was happening, and there was a lot going on. I think I would have enjoyed it more if I read it in physical form. But I did find the audio confusing, not knowing going in. But that is not to say that the story is not entertaining. It is entertaining. And like the narrator is really like spunky and fun. Um, but yeah, it's all just a bit odd when you don't know what's going on. And then the final audiobook that I read was picked by you two, and it was The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchison, which I loved and have now recommended to my partner, so I'm hoping she reads it as well. Um, I just don't think I'm going to read the rest. I think I'm just going to leave it here. I'm just going to read it as a standalone. I'm not going to listen to the rest of the series. I really enjoyed it, and I think what I enjoyed about it was that, like, obviously going into it, you guys were like the really hefty like list of content warnings, and I think because of that, I expected it to be a bit more actiony. But when it wasn't, I wasn't disappointed. I think I just had a different expectation going in, and then when it just sort of takes place with like Maya being interviewed, and it's sort of going back and like being the flashbacks of them being in the garden, yeah, I found it really, really interesting. I really loved it. And yeah, the only thought that I had about it was that final bit that I thought felt a little rushed with that storyline, which I won't tell you because it's a spoiler, but absolutely worth a read. It was probably on par with The Bad Beginning for favorite book of the month.
And on this one, I would just like to shout out Emma Reeves Crime, who is one of our Tandem family. She recommended this book to me originally. I said to her, recommend me the darkest book that you can. And she gave this book to me. And then obviously I made Jenny read it. And now I'm so glad that you've read it as well, Char, because it's so good. And I would kill to see it as a TV show or a film, but I've just got no idea how they do it. I don't know how you do the garden and justify the garden and make that all like visually as brilliant as it is in my head.
I think like talking about points of views, I think I would actually kill for this book as the gardener's point of view.
Oh, that's
Like
interesting.
that
Yeah.
would be so interesting to me. Like, how did all this start? How did you build this massive greenhouse and no one knows? Like, is it visible from the street? Is the glass see-through? Like, I'm assuming not, but how I just when Maya was like describing all like the like her being able to see out into like their other greenhouse, and I'm like, but where is this greenhouse in
Yeah.
perspective to the house? Didn't people think it was suspicious when this greenhouse just popped up? Did he have planning permission? Does the local council know that this exists? Who I know that money affords you a lot of liberties, and I don't doubt that a lot of that is what's happened here. But I just find it so interesting, especially because the descriptions of the garden are so intricate. Like, and I know we sort of got that little explanation of like, sorry, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but like the formaldehyde and how he funnels that through his other business, and that's all fine. I didn't have to suspend belief. I think it would be so interesting to know how this started and how, yeah, how it just still runs for this long and no one knows about it, or no one is even suspicious about it.
Yeah, so I would love a gardener's point of view, and it would be called something like The Gardener's Butterflies, like something like the same but different. But it would also have a couple of shorter chapters from members of his family's point of view, like
Yeah.
his wife, his children. I would be interested just to see.
Yeah. Anyway, that
Okay,
was me.
so
That's my wrap up for the month.
super speedy. So my next book was All the Sinners Bleed, and I think this was my favorite book of the month. So this was the first S.A. Cosby book that I'd ever read. Well, actually, still currently, it's the only S.A. Cosby book that I've ever read. But I have plans to change that for November 100%. I bought this because it was on a Kindle Daily deal. It was like 99p. Great, great, great. It's brilliant. Literally from page one right until the end, it is exceptional. We open at a school shooting, and then we realize that actually the perpetrator of the shooting is actually a victim of a much larger crime, and it is, it's race, it's trauma, it is, it's being investigated by the first black sheriff of the town. So there are so many different things at play and so many characters that you literally just want to gouge their eyes out. So it's excellent. It's brilliant. If you take any recommendations away from me in this video, it's this one, All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. Then I listened to The Death of Mrs. Westaway on audio, and I listened to this on Spotify, which actually led to a small break in me listening to this because I thought that I had been listening to it on Libby, but I got lost in all of my audio apps and I couldn't find it. But I listened to The Death of Mrs. Westaway, and this is a very it's a plot that we've heard before, but it was done in a really nice way. A young woman who lives in Brighton receives notice that she is a benefactor in a will of a woman that she doesn't think that she's related to. But she is desperate for the money, she needs the cash, so she goes and everything unravels from there. Really lovely. It's vintage Ruthware, so it's tip top. Next one was The Silence Factory. Now, this is a book that's just come out by Bridget Collins. I listened to it on audiobook and not my remit of reading. Okay, so I think if I had to give you a genre of what this book is, it would maybe be speculative historical crime, maybe. Um, a man in the 1400s at some point goes out to the jungle with his wife and discovers these spiders. He brings them back to England, he colonizes these spiders. There's a whole bit about, you know, freedom of movement and taking these spiders from where they should be and from where they are indigenous of, because he has discovered that the silk that these spiders weave, when you hang it up in your windows, you can't hear, like in once the silk has been woven into curtains, you hang it up in your windows, you can't hear anything from outside of your windows. It's like a perfect silencing tool. The problem is that the sound that you are making and the sound that you can't hear is reflected out into the world. So the town is going mad because all they can hear is the sound of everything being reflected off everything. I'm not doing it justice, but it's brilliant. It was so good. And it's definitely making me want to explore more historical Gothic thriller elements. Then, on a completely different tangent, I listened to a memoir, again on Spotify, called The Hardest Geezer, Mind Over Miles. And this is by Russ Cook. He is the ultramarathoner that just ran across, I say just, I think it was at the beginning of the year. He ran from the southernmost tip of Africa to the northernmost tip of Africa. Took him just over a year. And I did watch the YouTube series that he made along the way. I would still recommend listening to this book because it's such an interesting exploration on male ego and masochism and competitiveness and, you know, pushing yourself to the hardest limits of what you think is physically possible for you. He talks a lot about addiction and about his own personality type. I think had you have met Russ Cook previous to all of these adventures that he'd been on, you've been like, cool, you're an idiot. Like, you are drinking, you're gambling, you're like, you're a lad, and I don't like you. Now he's been through such an emotional journey. He's able to be really introspective on all of those things. And it's really, really interesting to listen to. And then lastly, two more. I listened to The Hike by Lucy Clark on audio. And the reason that I listened to this actually is because I want to gift it to somebody for Christmas, but I wanted to listen to it first to make sure that there wasn't going to be any rogue plot points that I wasn't aware of. There are. There are plot points in this book that you might want to be aware of before you gift it to anybody for Christmas. That being said, I liked it. I thought it was like just a nice little outdoors hiking thriller. That being said, content warnings, message me if you want. And then lastly, I read A Bird in Winter, which is by Louise Doughty, so same author of Apple Tree Yard. And we follow a member of the intelligence industry who's just been told some very, very bad news. And at the beginning, we don't know what the bad news is. All we know is that she needs to get her go bag and leave. And we follow her on that journey where she leaves and all of the different places that she goes and all of the things that she does to disguise who she is and where she's going. Really, really interesting. And that read along will kick off on November 7th.
Okay, so I'm going to run through my last few books. These aren't in the order I read them, but it's an order that makes sense in my head. So Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is like technically book 4 in the Truly Devious series, but it's like kind of also after the main trilogy. This one follows Stevie, who in the main Truly Devious series was solving murders in her school. She has now been invited to a camp to solve a murder from like 40 years ago that happened that no one has ever been able to solve. So let's set Stevie Bell on it. Really fun story. My only, like, I think with this one, and now this is again just a me thing. Lex, you might be able to agree with me on this one. When you're reading a mystery, I like to be able to solve the mystery myself. You know, I like to have had all of the clues and be able to solve along the same time. You can't do that with this one because the reveal, like the end bit, is revealed so far at the end that you as the reader can't work out who did it before that reveal. Fantastic story, but again, for me, I was like, oh, okay, no, I'd have never ever in a million years have guessed that because I couldn't. Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to Divine Rivals. This is like a historical fantasy romance following our two characters who are journalists. They're kind of rivals in book 1. They both end up going to the front lines of a war, which is a war between these two gods. Honestly, it's basically World War One, but make it slightly magical. Really, really cute romance. I had a fantastic time. I really enjoyed this trilogy, and Rebecca Ross is becoming a favorite author. I also read A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This one is, again, another fantasy. This one is Norse inspired. And yeah, so we have got Norse gods who kind of can help, I guess, give some magic to people in this world. It is, again, sort of Viking time frame. So we've got war bands and Vikings going out pillaging and all of that. Our main character is a chosen one, and there is a romance. I'm going to leave it there. For me, it wasn't the writing style that I love. My next pile that I want to go through, these are my 3 favorite books of the month. These ones I loved. The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. Absolutely amazing. I am obsessed with Elle Kennedy now. I read The Deal last month. This is book 2 in the series. This one is another hockey romance. I'm still in my hockey romance era. And it's just a really lovely, wholesome romance book set at university. I'm not going to go huge amounts into it, but loved it. The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. This is over 900 pages. It is a chunky boy, but so good. Honestly, I could have read another 900 pages and still been like sad when it ended. This is such a slow, beautiful, like incredibly built world. I loved everything about it. Again, I'm not going to actually go into too much what it's about because this is book 2 in the series and it's part of a bigger world, and so it's a lot. But honestly, Robin Hobb is one of the most amazing authors ever, and she's just impeccable. And I finally read The End Crowns All. This is the second book that was on my TBR that I actually read this month. No notes, literally no notes. Incredible, impeccable, amazing. I loved the relationship with Cassandra and Helen. I loved that we had ACE rep. I loved that the disability rep we had in here. I love that even though I know the story of the Trojan War, and as I was reading, I was like, I know what's going to happen. And I don't want that to happen because I know what's going to happen. I know the story of the Trojan War, but it's not, literally no notes. Amazing. I am going to quickly mention 2 other books. These are the 2 books that I unfortunately did not finish this month. Things We Say in the Dark by Kirsty Logan. This one is a horror short story collection. I picked it up. It was like 50p in the library. The library were doing a sale and I was like, well, that looks creepy. I'll buy that. Not the biggest fan of short stories, and these are all very, very short. Like some of them are about 3 paragraphs long. And I just found them a bit more weird than like creepy or scary. Like there was a story about someone who put her head in a doll's house and decided to brick herself up into this doll's house that was around her head. I was like, I'm not creeped out by this. I'm just confused. So not for me. And the other one, and I'm sorry about this, Char, A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon. It just didn't work for me. I think witchy cozy fantasy romance is not the genre for me. Yeah, it just didn't work.
And that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If there is anyone that has read any of the books that we've read this month, let us know in the comments, because we'd love to chat to you. And if you've gotten this far, drop a little book emoji in the comments to let me know that you did. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked this video, drop us a like, drop us a subscribe, and if you are interested in keeping up to date with our creator opportunities, you can join our newsletter list through the link in our bio, and in there you can also find the links to our TikTok, our Instagram, and our Pinterest accounts if you want to see more from us. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll see you on Friday for next month's video.